Stay tuned. The show is about to begin. Stay tuned. The show is about to begin.
Hi, Trina.
Hello, how are you?
Good. We got WaitBot on. I'm getting ready to just adjust my camera and then we will get started.
Okay.
Is everything good on your end?
Stay tuned.
Yes.
The show
Yeah,
is
I'm
about
ready.
to begin.
Okay, good. That's actually new. I haven't heard that in a while. Stay tuned. The show is about to begin. That's good. And I'll
okay.
be editing all this first few minutes out. So for
Okay.
those of you who are joining us on YouTube, welcome to the show, Alignment Vision Action. We're going to get started here in a couple of minutes with my special guest, Trenia Parham. And it's going to be a great conversation. So I'm excited that y'all are here with us tonight. So I changed that. You know what, Trina? I think you may have sent it to me, but I didn't see the email. Did you send me your links?
I thought I did, but maybe not.
Well, you know what? You may have, and I may have just missed it. Yeah, I don't see it. If you
Maybe
want to
not.
put it in the chat, it'll also be in the chat. So if you
Okay.
go to the emojis
Mm-hmm.
and select an emoji and then say add a message, you can stick it in there.
Okay.
Stay tuned. The show is about to begin.
Hey, Steph. We're going to get started here soon. Stephen Garrison is one of the people I was telling you about, Trina. His show is like fire. So
Okay.
when you come on here, you definitely want to look for his show. We're
I
going to get
will.
started
I
here
will
in a minute, Steph. Thank you for being here. Okay. Let me grab your links here. And I'm actually going to stick it in the, whoops. I just started it. Well, let's do it this way. And I'm going to stick it in there. Okay, I just stuck it in the fortune cookie. I don't know why my mind just was not working.
I see it. That's
So I
awesome.
just stuck it in the fortune cookie so people can see it there, and then I'll also add it before I release the show. I'll put it in the show notes as well,
Okay.
so people will
Sounds good.
have it.
Okay.
All right. Well, we've just got a couple of minutes, so we're actually going to go ahead and get started. I am going to mute WaitBot here. Yay! And I'm going to turn this stuff off too so I can see your face. So, welcome, welcome, welcome to Alignment Vision Action. It is Thursday evening, and I am your host, Laurel Rutledge. I'm so excited to be here with you guys today and for you to meet my incredible guest, Trenia Parham, and we're going to have an amazing conversation. So, I've got her bio in the show notes, y'all, so you can be sure and read it there. But let me just give you just a little bit, like her title and some things that she does. And so she is a leadership consultant and strategist. And some of the things she does is really helping organizations and companies create thriving workplaces, right? And the way she does that is improving tone, climate, culture, reducing conflict, and retaining talent. And so we're going to talk, especially tonight, around that whole idea of conflict and retention, and that whole idea of how culture plays on that, how all that stuff fits together, because it is, it's corporate is a thing, y'all. And so we're gonna we're gonna talk about how you get organizations to be, forward moving. And so I put her link in the fortune cookie, so you should be able to see that. And I have also I will put it in the show notes when we're done, so you'll be able to get it there as well. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Good evening, Lisa. Thank you for joining the show. So Trenia, let's start here. And thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have you
Oh,
on the
thanks for
show.
having me.
So why don't we start here? Tell people a little bit more kind of in depth about not only what you're doing now, but how did you get here?
Okay. So hello, everyone. Laurel, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this. So again, my name is Trenia Parham, and I'm a leadership coach and strategist. And what I do is I help organizations and companies. So I work with nonprofits. I work in the public sector and companies as well, and essentially helping them to improve tone, climate, and culture in the workplace, and to improve relational dynamics. And so what I really focus on is a fundamental question of how do we make work work? Because so much of what frustrates people about working are these dynamics around relationships, communication, tone, how things are said, how things are communicated. Does the image or does the reputation of an organization or company, the external reputation, align with the internal reputation? And so that's really what I focus on. And so Laurel actually just included another link for how to keep great people. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, I'll put that in there too,
yes.
so we make sure we have it. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so the how to keep great people playbook that I created, it essentially lays out exactly what organizations and companies need to do to retain their talent. So if you're interested in that, you can certainly check it out. And how I got here was, having worked for, 20 some odd years in institutions where it didn't work, or where I was in a position to help make it work. And so, I worked in city government, I worked in child welfare as a consultant, and I've worked in large nonprofits in New York City, in addition to running my own business, and which is what I solely do now. And so in all of those institutions where there's a lot of people, there's a lot of dynamics, and, I'll never forget when I worked for the city, someone said to me, the same people you see up are the same people you're going to see on the way down.
Yes.
And so it's just those type of mentalities that really stood out to me. And the most important thing these are great people, for everything that people tend to say and think about city employees. And I was thinking to myself, they're great people who want to work hard, who want to do good work, who need to support their families. And when I saw constantly the dynamics that were happening, that were making people cry in the bathroom or, not get promoted, and certainly having my own experience of having bosses deliberately stymie my career, and so those are things that I started to work on, not only with individuals, but it was something that, particularly in my last job, that I was doing a lot of strategic work with the organization and the leadership team. And I was part of that leadership team. And so that was a huge part. And so leading a department where there were a lot of things that had to be changed, and all of these issues were
Mm-hmm.
coming up, not only that I had dealt with
Yep.
and had to confront, as an employee and as a leader, but also with my team. And
Mm-hmm.
so I saw all of this and I knew there has to be a better way. And there were things that I was implementing, and there were things that I wanted to implement or my co-leaders wanted to implement that the organization would bristle. And so and so that was a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And then during COVID, really the height of the pandemic, one of the things that I saw was how many people were stepping away from work, stepping back, and
Right.
particularly a lot of the leaders that I worked with, the women leaders that I work with. And this question became why people all of a sudden don't want to go back. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just people need flexibility, they need time to tend to their lives. But the
Right.
question became, why do organizations resist this if they're also hitting their goals?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of dynamics in there that I was working with a few organizations around this. And so, but that time in particular really took me deeper into this topic and just how to keep the great people that you work so hard to hire. It's so much
Mm-hmm.
easier and better to retain these great people than to keep going out and having to hire, and the turnover, and that you get caught up in, because
Yeah.
you can't just fix these very specific small subtle shifts that will make a big difference in your culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's good. And there's so much there to unpack, because having come out of corporate, the same thing, right? Almost 30 years, and in leadership, big professional services firms, big oil, big chem, I mean, manufacturing, those good old boy things are real, right? And that whole idea of words and actions aligning, which is I tell all the people all the time, like, words matter, and your words and actions must align, because people will listen to what you say, but they will believe what you do. And so when you
Absolutely.
talk about that whole, relational piece, and especially with everything that's going on now, and tone, because you can say, now help me understand, or you can say, now help me understand, right? I mean, it's
Hmm.
body
Hmm.
language, tone, all of that stuff
Absolutely.
makes a
Absolutely.
difference. And so when you're starting to really talk about retention, right, and culture and tone, how do you address the underlying societal challenges around the story we put onto tone, depending on who's saying the thing, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
no matter if we're being direct, and we're not being, we being Black women, and are
Hmm.
not submissive, or our voice is a little bit louder, or our words are very direct, our tone is seen as aggressive or mad, as opposed to direct and clear. How do you help
Absolutely.
organizations work through, when we talk about tone, you got to also think about what you're imparting or putting onto somebody that may or may not be true.
Absolutely. So the first thing that I go in with is asking the question, is this something that you're even concerned about?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't assume that people want to change. I don't assume that
Right.
organizations want to do something different, even if it doesn't work, even if it
Mm-hmm.
offends people, even if they have a lot of people quitting. I don't assume that they want something different. So the
Mm-hmm.
first thing is, do you actually want something different? And then in that, well, let's look at what about this tone keeps coming up. Who's saying it?
Mm-hmm.
What are the
Mm-hmm.
complaints? Where are they coming from? Because then it becomes important to make a connection. Are they all
Mm-hmm.
Black women? Are they all
Mm-hmm.
Black men? And then what exactly is happening? Who's making the complaints? What's actually happening with tone? How is
Right.
it being said? And so when you start to get into those specific things and you start to thread them together, then you can paint a picture for them about what's really happening. So I don't need to tell you that it's Black women all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to
Mm-hmm.
see it because you start naming names, and I'm like, oh, okay. So it's fascinating that
Yeah.
everybody on this list is a Black woman.
Yeah.
So let's talk.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this story that I see that you just told me.
Right. Right. And that's where what I love about that, and I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, look, there are things that you're going to emotionally respond to, because we're human. But I encourage you to get the data. Now, the data
Yes.
is the data is just the facts. That's just the fact. That's just the information. Then you've got to understand the insight through the information. So like you're saying, let's get all of the who's saying it, when are they saying it, who's making the complaint, let's get the data, and then let's start to connect the dots and tell the story of the data so that we can act upon the impact, right, that's coming from facts, not from emotion.
Absolutely. And then we can take it a level deeper. And if someone is saying, okay, this person's tone, well, tell me more about that. What exactly
Mm-hmm.
did she say? How did it sound to you?
Mm-hmm.
And then asking her, well, what were the intentions and all of that? Of course, getting all that information. But then we have to
Mm-hmm.
go in with the understanding that we know what people think when Black women are direct.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that becomes another conversation in itself. So
Mm-hmm.
that the totality of that conversation begins to help them unpack and create systems to help
Mm-hmm.
attack and deal with what's happening when that issue comes up.
Mm-hmm. And so, I was just, in fact, as I was getting ready for the show, I was listening to NPR On Point, and they were talking about, now the context of the show was around tipping, and this under the new, post COVID, actually started during COVID. There's all these ways to tip. Even if you're, Grubhub, you can't even place your order unless you say you're going to tip. Someone was talking about in New York, there's a pastry place where he places an order and he goes to pick it up, and yet they're looking for him to tip. And he's like, "Who am I tipping? Right? Who am I tipping? Because I'm placing the order, I'm paying for, and I'm picking it up. So who am I tipping?" And so around this conversation, they brought in this. I think was he at Harvard? I can't remember where the professor was, but they brought a professor in who was talking about this whole idea around tipping. But the real crux of the issue was, in this industry, especially around food service, retention was a problem, right? And part of the retention challenge is about money. And when COVID happened and a lot of those jobs went away, and then, as it came back, there were opportunities for people to quote unquote level up, right? Because there was so much need for folks as other people decided to start businesses or stay home or whatever. They've now, the restaurant industry, this food service or service industry has moved into a retention response that's about mandatory tipping. So they're trying to say, or they're saying that pay is the key to retention issues in this industry. And so if we can force tipping, that's going to help, right? So that was the whole thing. But in that, and thinking about this conversation that we're having, is how do you dig deeper? So now this is an ex HR person, right, and a data HR person. How do you help people think through and determine what are the real issues around retention and retaining good talent, and, which is controversial, determining that some talent needs to go? Like, how do you help people understand what retention with a big R really means?
Mm-hmm. So for me and my perspective, I like to look at things holistically. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that part of that means looking at when you're talking about money and looking at society and how things are set up. So just making
Mm-hmm.
sure, first of all, that we're leaning our ladder against the right house. And so what
Mm-hmm.
that means is we know societally that people are struggling. We know
Mm-hmm.
that there's money that needs to be given. We know that the fact that people's benefits are solely tethered to their jobs and how hard it is to get health insurance. I mean, all these kinds of things, all these issues we know. And so it really starts with that basic understanding of what an employee is dealing with on a daily basis. So
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about retention, it's like these are people's reality. And
Yeah.
so when you go in and you start thinking about how am I going to retain these good people, understand the context with which they're working for you.
Mm-hmm.
That really matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you begin to understand that context, then it's like, okay, based on that, how can I be a positive contributor to this? Yes, I'm concerned about my bottom line and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
but these people are coming to me as one part of their lives,
Mm-hmm.
and I need to understand all these other pieces that are happening. So with, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so that really is to me, the foundational understanding. And when you're thinking about why people want to leave, why don't they want to stay? It's like, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
there's stress. And you think
Yes.
about the way we live in this country and how much stress the average working person is under and
Mm-hmm.
why. So, I mean, we can talk about large corporations and businesses and how they might want to get into the political game in the right way. I mean, that's a
Right.
whole other conversation. But to
Right.
just understand the realities that people face, because I think a lot of times companies don't think about that. And look, this doesn't have to be a big elaborate thing. It's just understanding what people are dealing with every day.
Yeah.
And so when they come through those doors to work for you, this is the context.
Yes. And so it sounds like this is where, at least in my brain, this is where kind of the work that you're doing connects retention and culture. Because
Yes,
what I'm hearing through what you're saying is just about it's not about the fundamentals of retaining people. It is about creating an environment in which people want to stay. So
absolutely.
it's not necessarily right. Let's be active around retention. Let's be active around environmental change that impacts retention.
Absolutely. Now, look, don't get
Okay.
me wrong. There are some very specific things people can do to be
Yes,
better at retention.
of course.
but overall, it is about that environment. And
Mm-hmm.
so, what I go and help people do is figure out how do we work on that,
Mm-hmm.
because that is
Mm-hmm.
really what's going to make the difference. Because, I'll tell you, so many organizations, they've had so many trainings, they've sent staff out, they've had people coming in, and it's like, and it's still not working. I mean, they've spent
Right.
hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the institution or the
Mm-hmm.
company. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it's not it's not about these things. You don't need to pay for another system. That's not going to
Right.
fix it.
Right. Right. And if you have a basic HR system, you should be able to get to the data and then actually take
Mhm.
action if you're willing to have difficult conversations with your leaders about what you've really got and what you're really creating.
Absolutely. And I think, and that's another big thing that I focus on with folks is the fact that you already have the data. You
Mm-hmm.
already have the information. If you've been doing staff surveys, if you've been doing exit
Mm-hmm.
interviews, if you've been having all these trainings and getting feedback on them, you already know. So when I go
Right.
in and I work with these organizations and companies, I'm saying, let's just talk about what you already know.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
not here to bring you something. I'm here to help you
Yep.
to decipher what you're looking at and how to come up
Mm-hmm.
with something based on what you already know. But let's just look at it. I mean, how many companies have not looked at their exit interviews, or looked at their staff surveys?
Right.
How many
Right.
years has it been? Even though you keep doing them every year, but you don't do anything with the information.
I would tell my leaders all the time, I'm like, look, we are not doing one more survey if we're not going to do something with the information. Just stop it. All you do is irritate people. You're asking me
Mm-hmm.
what I think, you're asking me what I feel, you're asking me what I need, and then you do nothing. Even if we go back and we get the data and we say, here are the things that you told us, here's what we can work on, and here's what we can't, right? You can't just go radio silent and say, well, we did a survey, and you think that's going to make people feel better because you're asking them. No, that may have happened when surveys first started,
Mm-hmm.
but people are smart and they're savvy and they know, well, we're telling people, but they're not doing anything. They're just sending the survey to appease us. Stop
Absolutely.
that. Just stop doing that.
Absolutely. And so then people start just giving you answers that they think you want to
Mm-hmm.
hear. So then it
Mm-hmm.
impacts the data. And it's like, then do you really have anything good, solid to build on?
Right. Right. And so
Mhm.
when you think about those cultures, so there is so much going on, and you're right, especially some of the things we found coming out of COVID, and the good move to really begin to put, because I don't think we're there yet, but to begin to put mental health, front and center, to begin to try to remove some of the stigma around, look, I just need a mental health day, right? I just need a minute. Um, how do you help organizations, especially when you talk about nonprofits and government entities? And I'm going to call them out now because if you think in terms of sophistication around the people stuff, that's not where you see that, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it for mostly for the way the institutions have been built and the way most nonprofits have started, right? Not because they don't want to, but just because of the way the institutions have been built. So how do you help these institutions that may have a fundamental goal, purpose, drive, social impact initiative around people, right? Or a societal issue. How do you help them turn that camera around and say, you're doing all this stuff for social impact, or you're doing all this stuff for kids or families or the homeless or vets or whatever, which is amazing, outward facing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help them understand that that's really great, but if you're not turning that mirror around, your ability to truly make the impact on the issue that you want to make the impact is going to be severely hampered? How do you help them tie those together?
First of all, stating something very similar to what you just said. Um, so that's the first part. The other thing is going back to something that I mentioned earlier. I don't assume that people want to change.
Mm-hmm.
Because if
Mm-hmm.
we're being honest and we talk about the way a lot of these organizations have started, the way that they're funded, they don't want to be anything different. And that is a hard pill to swallow, to think that some organizations are just used as, PR companies. I mean, there's a lot of that happens in the nonprofit space. I'm just going to be honest.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so I think it starts with that. But for those that are really curious, that are really interested in doing this, it's that assessment of self to say, okay, we're doing really great work. And again, when you hear all of these rumblings from staff and you know that you're doing good work, the externally facing work is helping people, it's moving the needle in some way, then you have to say to yourself, okay, how do we get in alignment? Because it's only going to get better.
Yeah.
And for some, and as I said, for some, they don't care.
Right.
I'm going to be honest. And some of these nonprofits need to go out of business. I mean, those are just the facts.
That part.
Right. But for the ones who need to be around, I think that matters, that you are going to concern yourself, because that's how you move forward. And honestly, those are there hasn't been nearly enough innovation in the public sector and the nonprofit worlds, not nearly enough. And part of that has to do with funding. Part of, there's a lot of factors there, but also part of it is hampering good people and not treating them well. And so there's so much that can be gleaned when you've got these great people who are on fire and ideas, but you're so afraid of them that you won't let them rock and do what they're great at. And so they leave.
Egos.
And there has egos. Absolutely. And there has been a huge push, at least pre-COVID, where a lot of nonprofit leaders were going into corporate. Even now you see a lot of teachers who are leaving teaching and they're going to corporate. They're getting these jobs. And it's like, you're going to deal with the stress, you're going to deal with low pay, you're going to deal with being disrespected, you're going to deal with all of these things. Why? It's like, at least if you get a corporate job or you do something else, they're going to pay you well.
Yes. Yeah. So you're some kind of compensation for the pain. So it's
absolutely
balances out until it doesn't. Right.
Absolutely. And I think as a nonprofit or public entity or whatever it is, or city or government or NGO or whatever, that it's those questions. You have to be asking holistic questions of your work. So, the I don't know, whatever, if you're tackling homelessness, just say, do you know if anyone that works for you is doubled up? Or doesn't have, do you even know about your own people? Right. Do you know how people are struggling? I mean, those kinds of questions that you have to be asking. And especially in a city like New York, where I live, I mean, the cost of living here is astronomical. And so you can have people working every day that you think might be a good salary in another city, where they're living under paycheck to under paycheck here, and might be struggling in terms of where they're living. So even just asking those basic questions that are self-reflective as an organization, but again, you have to care about that. And so to get people to care, honestly, sometimes it takes lawsuits, sometimes it takes embarrassment, public embarrassment, sometimes it takes being in the papers. And I hate for it to get to that point. But for a lot of these institutions, that's what it takes to wake them up.
I,
unfortunately. But
yeah, I
I was going
just,
to say, but for those who care,
mhm,
they are going to do. They want to do the self-reflective work. They're listening to
yes.
staff. They're understanding what's happening, and they want to do better.
And I literally, I was at a think tank conversation this week, and we literally were talking about, there was a woman who's doing some things in an area here called Third Ward. Hey, Jennifer, thank you for being here for the show. We were talking about this place called Fifth Ward, and she goes out and does some work, and it is a place where um, very low kind of socioeconomic, heavy gentrification happening, um, food desert. You have to take 10 buses to get downtown, which is literally 10 minutes away because most people don't have cars. And she is in a nonprofit that's trying to do some things, right, to deal with some of these socioeconomic challenges. And one of the things she said was, we have these organizations, these nonprofit organizations that are showing up, these economic development boards that are showing up. But what they're not doing is talking to people, or they won't publicize, right? They had a big town meeting. Some people showed up, other people didn't. They're like, y'all didn't publicize it. And you put it at this time when people who are here have to work. But do you mean it or do you not mean it? Right?
Hmm.
What the lip service is getting old, right? And
Absolutely.
so what kind of questions do you ask, or do you have people who are interested in doing this work, like whether they can bring you in or they at least start kind of grassroots internally themselves? What kind of questions do you have people ask to start with? What are we going to do with shifting this culture so that people here feel valued and safe, right, and able to do their genius so that we can impact the goals that the organization says it has? How do they start?
So how do they? I'm just so I get your question right. So how do people within an organization do this?
Yeah, within an organization, how do they start asking the right questions and challenging if they're not ready to bring in an expert yet?
Hmm. So I think the way that you start is looking at the points within the organization and in the work that feel incongruous. So
Mm-hmm.
what is not in alignment for us right now?
Mm-hmm.
So if you
Mm-hmm.
see that, hey, a big issue, respect, for example, or tone or
Mm-hmm.
how we communicate, if you
Mm-hmm.
see that that's something that comes up um, within your organization or something personal that you've experienced, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's also a good place to start because oftentimes you're not the only one. And so you begin to think about that. Well, what has my
Yeah.
experience been here? And I think for a lot of folks who work in the nonprofit space, that part of
Mm-hmm.
it is I care about this very important mission, and
Yes.
what's my personal ethos around this,
Mm-hmm.
and then also how does that apply to the actual work that I'm doing. So there's my own personal ethos and politics, and then there's what I care about as an employee, and to be in alignment with whatever the goals and mission of the organization are.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think you start there, and again asking those questions about where do things feel out of alignment for
Yeah.
us. I think that's a
Yes.
really important question. The other question that's sort of a bigger, more on that meta level sort of question is about are we really doing, is our mission really getting towards the real end goal?
Mm.
Because sometimes, so when you think about nonprofit work or this community that you just described, if the issue is
Mm-hmm.
transportation, it's like, are we trying to really get people to their destinations,
Right.
or are we just trying to just keep them, we're just making this better system that actually doesn't work? It's like, are we
Right.
really after getting people from A to B in the most efficient
Mm-hmm.
way possible? Is that what we're really
Mm-hmm.
after, or is it something else? Are we doing something
Right.
else?
Right.
And
It's
even just
yeah.
that was a good place to
Yeah.
start.
And that's such a deep question because on the one hand, it's like sometimes we have good intentions, but there's a bad impact, and the easiest way that I can describe that to people, I think about, the generations and kind of the industrial revolution and how we've evolved here in the US, and how over generations it was like, I want my kids to do better than me. I want my kids to do better than me. And that translated into, I don't want my kids working in coal mines. I don't want my kids working in manufacturing. I don't want my kids doing blue collar. I want my kids to go to a 4-year college. I want my kid to go to an Ivy League, right? It was all of these things that better looked like. The unintended consequences of that really good intention was now we're trying to find people who are plumbers and electricians and, all the things that are blue collar, that it's not seen as good work. And I'm telling you, having been in manufacturing, there were folks working on my plant floor that were making more money than me, right? It is good work, honest work that can really support a family. And you don't have to have a 4-year degree from an Ivy League college to do most things. And we already know, all the research says that grade point does not equal success. Grade point average doesn't equal success, and neither does an SAT score, right? So over time, we figured all these things out. And so when you're looking at all of these things that people are trying to do, especially social impact organizations, be they for profit or not for profit. And you mentioned earlier about this whole, leadership and what do they really want? What are they really trying to do? And how do they get out of the way of the people who have really great innovative ideas, right? That whole, some of it's intergenerational, some of it's true ego. If I let somebody else who knows more than me, then, I lose my job or I lose my power. When you go in and you see that, you walked into an organization, they have said and demonstrated to you they are ready to make change. And then you run into this leadership issue, this ego issue. How do you start? Let me back up first. Where do you start dealing with that? And how do you start dealing with that?
Mm-hmm. So this is part of what I talk about in my playbook, How to Keep Great People. And it's part of my culture shift framework that I use with organizations. And in that culture shift framework, I talk about being a self-aware leader. And so that is always where I start, because it is important to acknowledge for yourself in these organizations and in these companies, when you're doing this work, what your own needs are. Because I think sometimes when you're doing any type of social impact work, you are thinking about yourself. And there's this idea that, oh, you're just completely selfless and you just don't care about money. And it's like, that's not true. It's not true.
Right.
So being a self-aware leader means, okay, I need to be aware of my needs. I need to be aware of my fears. I need to be aware of my wants. I need to be aware of my desires, all of that, and how that impacts you as a leader, and being empathetic as a leader and understanding your people. So that really is where you have to start, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult to do the other pieces without this self-awareness. And when you have that self-awareness, even if it's prickly, when you want to invite these ideas in, at least you have an understanding of yourself. And you can say, okay, I recognize when this is coming up. I know when this person walks through my door and they have another idea, I know this is going to trigger me. It's going to do something. And so when you start with that, it's like, okay, at least I can be honest about this thing. I can be honest with myself about what's happening.
Right.
And when you can be honest, then that makes room. You're able to make room for this other piece. You're able to make room for other people to come in. And it also might be a good question for you to say, hey, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I need to move on.
See? I call this show Alignment, Vision, Action for a reason, right? And it is a fundamental piece of the work that I do with my founders, right? My women-owned founders moving to CEO, and it starts with alignment, because you have to know who you are first. You have to know who you are, and then you have to be really aware of where you are. And when you get those two things, then you can start, as you said, start making those decisions. And sometimes that decision is, you know what, this just is not aligned with who I am. It just isn't. It's not an impact I want to make. Maybe it was good in the beginning, or maybe I was looking for a job when I found this one, right? To own that, because we've all been there, right?
Yes,
it's okay
absolutely. Absolutely.
But, you don't have to. I think we forget sometimes that especially when the economy goes weird and you get all this, we're going into a recession and now AI is going to take everybody's jobs. I mean, there's always something to be worried about. We forget that we have choices. And what I love about what you just said is in that self-awareness, really understanding what lights you up, right? What brings you joy? Because when you're in that place and you're able to bring your full energy and your full self to whatever you're doing, your ability to then lead without ego, because leadership is about getting things done by, with, for, and through other people. It's not about you, right? And so if you are really in that self-awareness mode, your ability to let go of the ego is so much easier. And so if you're when you talk to people about kind of that self-awareness and you're helping them work through that framework that you have, what are some of the key hurdles that you see people going through in trying to get to that self-awareness piece?
I think a lot of people don't know who they are. A lot of people don't know who they are, and a lot of people aren't grounded in anything. And it's like when you need to have courage and be bold about something and stand up for something and to allow that space and to put ego aside, you need something to hold on to. When you don't feel anchored in something. So I always say getting anchored within, getting anchored somewhere. And if you don't have that, it's going to be really hard. And look, this is not about religion. It could be anything.
No.
It could be your family. It could be your ancestors. It could be God. It could be nature. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But to have that thing that anchors you, that makes you stand firm and say, okay, I know who I am regardless of what happens here. And so a lot of people don't have that. And so I talk a lot about finding and connecting into that anchor, and also knowing what your North Star is. And so that North Star is that thing that guides you no matter what. So my thing is peace and freedom. No matter what, peace and freedom, that's my North Star. So when I'm making decisions, when I'm doing things, whatever it is, if peace and freedom is not at the forefront of that decision, it's probably going to be a no for me.
Right.
So knowing what that is for you makes making decisions a lot easier, because you don't feel so rattled. You don't feel so put out or afraid that someone's going to take your place or all of that, because you know that no matter what happens, you have a place. And not only that, but you have value outside of work. Work is not it's not your only thing. Work is one part. Look, we all have to do it. We all have to show up, and hopefully we're doing something that we love, that we care about, that's meaningful to us, that we enjoy. But work is one part of the rest of your life. And when you can put work in proper perspective, it makes everything so much easier. And you're like, you know what? I'm going home, and I have a family, and I have other things I need to take care of. And I'm going on vacation. I'm going to the beach. I'm doing whatever it is, and I'm enjoying the rest of my life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I tell people all the time, I was reading this article. I don't even remember where it was. It may have been in Fast Company. And, and the way they categorized people was really interesting. And it was that whole, you've got people who are very much work to live people. You got me for these 8 hours, this 40 hours a week. And if I can make that 35, then I'm going to do that. But when I'm here, I'm here. But when I'm not, don't call me, right? I don't exist. And you got people on the other end of the spectrum who are like live to work. I mean, that job, that career climb, that the title, that is what, like, in their gut is what, that work is their thing. But the majority of people, if you think about like a normal curve, right? The majority of people are in the middle of that. And we move through that cycle along our life, right? Because there may be things that happen in your life. You may be starting a family, or you may be going back to school, or you may be doing something in your life, taking care of an aging parent, where that work thing has to move in terms of priority. How you do it, where you do it, when you do it, all those kind of things. And I think, to your point, helping people understand what really, really matters to them fundamentally, right? Their grounding, like you say, peace and freedom, right? What fundamentally matters to them that does not shift, and what are the things that are important to them sitting on top of that because of their life at the moment, right? Because it's a combination of those two things.
It really is. And, I'll tell you, so, another part of the work that I do is I coach women leaders on recovering from burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through my own burnout experience, and, I had to deal with that. And part
Mm-hmm.
of, and that was certainly part of my shift. And
Yeah.
one of the things that a mentor told me once is, there's a difference between walking, sprinting, and being in a marathon.
Yes.
And at different points in your career, you're going to be in different places.
Yes.
But the thing is, you can't be in a sprint all the time.
Right.
And for
Right.
those people who are on the higher end where they live to work, someone
Mm-hmm.
else has to be taking care of the rest of their lives.
Yes.
Most
Yes.
people don't have, so if you got kids, who's taking care of the kids? If you have
Right.
aging or sickly parents or relatives, who's
Mm-hmm.
doing that work? Who's doing the shopping, the grocery shopping, who's cleaning, who's
Right.
doing all of these other things that comprise your life?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
if you've got that support and that's how you want to live, hey, fine, do it.
Right. If that's your
But for
thing.
most, that's your thing. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But for the rest of us, we have to be able to know when we're in a marathon, when we're in a sprint, and when we're just walking.
Yes.
And knowing that that marathon or that sprinting time is not all the time.
Right.
And so when
Right.
you get that, and it's like, and when you're not in a sprint, because what I find with a lot of folks is they don't know what to do with themselves when they're not in a sprint.
Right. It's the
Everything
habit of
feels like
hustle.
a sprint. Absolutely. The
Yeah.
habit of hustle. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
to be able to sit with yourself and to say, okay, who am I? What do I want outside of
Yeah.
work? If that is not my
Yes.
only sole identity.
Right. Right. And to make that conscious decision, because I have a really dear friend of mine. She's amazing. And I met her when I was working at Deloitte, and she happens to be a professional dancer as well. And at the time she was dancing professionally and she was working at Deloitte. And since then, all things have changed. She's now working somewhere else. And it's been a real struggle for her with these folks. And I remember having this conversation with her once, and I was like, you know what? I remember when we were at Deloitte together. I said, and it was you were managing and dealing with the same number of people with the same ego issues, probably on 10,000 compared to what you're doing now. And it wasn't any big deal for you because in your mind, you had made up your mind this job was a job that funded your passion. You weren't leaving yourself at that job. Because see, the job was just a paycheck because this other thing was what you really love to do. And I said, where does this new one fit? I said, because it's somehow become the center. I said, and I don't think it is. I don't think you intend it to be. And she, about a month or so later, she's like, girl, when you said that, I was like, you know what? You're right. This is simply what's funding me to do the things I want to do. And so I heard that years ago from, I think it was Lisa Nichols, who's like, think about if for those who are doing like a side hustle, right? Think about your employer as your funding source for the thing you really want to
Mm-hmm.
do.
Yes.
Make sure, even if you love what you're doing and this is the place you want to be, make sure you're still, to your point, being balanced and staying connected and aligned to who you are and what you really want for your life. Because that thing may work for you for 5 years, 30 years, or it may work for now.
Mm-hmm.
Things come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime, right? That may not be your lifetime thing. It may be your
Absolutely.
right now thing. And when you're grounded in who you are, right? And for me, I actually take people, see, this is why we're so connected. Because I take my clients through a process and it's a tree like my logo. But that first piece is that grounding. What are the things that ground you? So when your life is insane, where do you go back? And for me, it's faith, family, friends, and health, right? And that health
Mm-hmm.
is physical, mental, emotional, psychological, financial. It's all the things. It's big age. So when my world is crazy, I know one of those things is off because I've been really clear that these are the things that keep me solid. They keep me grounded. They keep me peaceful, right? They keep me in joy. So when
Mm-hmm.
my brain is messy and something's off, I'm like, okay, pause. What's not working, right? You haven't talked to your mom, right? You haven't
Mm-hmm.
hung out with some friends. You're not working out or eating the way you're supposed to be doing. Something's off. And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for, as you said earlier, getting still and figuring out what it is for you. besides that job, right? Because the job can change its
Absolutely.
mind tomorrow and decide you're not the person.
Absolutely.
What is that you need, and how do you keep that
Absolutely.
forefront?
Absolutely. As you're talking about your friend, I had a colleague years ago who was a musician,
Mm-hmm.
and we were in the same position, but he said, you know what? And I was really stressed out and worried. And he
Yeah.
was like, you know what? He was like, you know what? I go to work, I come to work, I do my gig, and I go home. And that always stuck with me,
Yep.
the fact that he
Yep.
said that. And I eventually got to that point, especially as I was growing my business and I was doing all that because I was
Yep.
also working full time at the time. And that just really stood out to me. And a lot of people do
Mm-hmm.
have that. And it's like when you have this other driver, it does make a
Yes.
difference in the decisions that you make, what you choose to worry about, what bothers you. All
Yep.
of that stuff really does shift. And I will also say, or when something is going on, my mom
Yes.
passed away a few years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
when that happened, and she was in that process,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't care about anything else. I'm like, listen, I'm there
No.
with her. This
Right.
is this is my time. This is my focus, and this is where
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be with her while this is happening.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
just those things that often can shift, your priorities. And I like to say, if folks are having trouble getting in touch with that how do you create a little bit of white space in your life and in your mind? And
Mm-hmm.
that just means
Mm-hmm.
getting things off your plate that you don't want to be committed to, that thing that you
Yes.
said yes to, you really wanted to say no to.
Right.
When you start to get things like that off your plate and to just have even 10 minutes of doing nothing uninterrupted. You're not
Yes.
doing anything, you're just sitting by yourself, no noise, you're not reading, you're not listening to anything,
Right.
you're literally just sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And Laura,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be surprised how many people can't even do that for 5 minutes.
Honey. Yes.
But to be
Yes.
able to just sit and just do that, because then you are confronting yourself.
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
you have to say, okay, oh, so I actually don't really want this, or yes, I do, and I need to turn it up a notch, or whatever it is.
Right.
But that's the only way
Yeah.
that you get to it. And sometimes we're so busy, there's so much noise, we're being pulled in so many different directions, we have so many responsibilities, especially as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's a
Yes.
lot. And so
It's a
you need
lot.
that time. You need that time to just, you know, go in,
Yeah.
connect, and see what's going on.
And it's interesting because I tell people all the time because I like I said I was in corporate almost 30 years, and of course when I left, people were like, "Oh my God, you're living that good job, right? What are you doing? Like, are
Mm,
you crazy?" And but I also tell people, look, I've never worked harder in my life than when I started this business because I just left, right, and just said, "Here's what I'm going to do." So I just went all in. Um, that was number one. But the second thing is, there's nothing like entrepreneurship to bring all that stuff that you've buried because you've been busy. You've been chasing the promotion. You've been dealing with the madness and the conflict. You've been fighting the folks trying to rewrite history if you're in a big corporation. You've been fighting, if you're in HR like I was too at the end of my career, you're fighting all the madness because people are interesting, right? And you don't realize how much time you don't spend on you until you are forced to spend time on you. Because I started in
absolutely.
2018 and then COVID happened in 2020. Right. So I'm like, I spend a lot of time with me. Now I'm pretty introverted. I'm professionally extroverted, right? I'm an ambivert. I show up extroverted when I have to. But so COVID didn't impact me as bad as a lot of people because I was cool with being in my house by myself. And I recognized that in that solitude, that kind of solitude, it's different. There's a difference between taking time to be alone and becoming solitary. Those are two different
Mhm.
things, right? Having solitude and being solitary are two different things. And so I think, when you tell people and you coach people to, spend that time, it is that awareness that you talked about is so critical to anything we want to do. Awareness of who you are, where you are, awareness of your own behavior, awareness of how your behavior impacts you and other people around you. It is like full circle awareness. And I don't think we spend enough time doing that.
We really don't. And as I said, and I think part of it is going back to what we were talking about earlier, is a lot of these systems that do impact someone's ability to be able to do that.
Yes. Yes.
So when you're worried about money, and you're worried about health insurance, and you're worried about all these big
Yes.
things that impact you that you don't have control over
Mm-hmm.
sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
it can impact your ability to carve out that time because you're so
Yeah.
worried. But we
Yes.
do have the ability to take 10 minutes.
Yes.
We do have the ability to sit and to think, or to
Yeah.
write, or to
Mm-hmm.
pray, or to do whatever it is that you do to connect
Yeah.
into yourself,
Yes.
or to
Yeah.
with whatever you need to connect with. We can all do that,
Yeah. We can and should. It is
and
critical that we do.
need to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's critical that we
absolutely.
do. Well, I mean, I could talk to you for another 4 days. So, because this is such an important conversation around, really, really owning self and being true to self in order to serve others and create cultures that create safe spaces where people feel seen and valued, right? It's
Mhm.
not it's not about worthiness, right? Because no one can ever pay you what you're worth because you're priceless because you exist. But people can pay you for the value that you bring, and they can create safe spaces where you feel valued and you feel seen and you feel like you contribute. And the work that you're doing, Trina, to help these organizations create cultures that allow for the retention of incredible talent, I think is just, it's such meaningful, powerful, necessary work. And I don't think there are enough people doing it. I just
Yeah,
don't.
thank you so
So
much.
I
Laurel, I
appreciate
see
it.
a question there. I see a question someone has.
Hey, Steph. Yeah, come on. Do you want to come to the stage? Oh, yeah. What's your view on political figures pushing anti woke on companies? Do you think companies will change how they do things? That's a great question, Steph.
Hmm. Companies, political figures pushing anti-woke on companies. I'm not sure what you mean.
That would
Um,
really mean I'm going to invite you to uh-oh. Okay, my system just locked up on me, Steph. So hopefully y'all can still see me. Oh, there it is. I'm going to have you come up to the stage, Steph. Is he still there? Okay, that's so weird. Oh, there we are. Okay. I don't know what's going on with Fireside, but it is acting up for me. Okay, Steph, I'm going to have you come up to the stage. Let's see if it'll let me do that. It's not letting me invite you for some reason. Can you invite yourself,
it's not.
Steph? Yeah, that's so strange. I'm not sure what's going on with Fireside tonight, but it is not. Every time I click on, oh, there he is. Okay, accept request. All right, let's see if that'll do it because it wouldn't let me invite you directly, Steph. So hopefully it'll come up now. Okay, let's try it again. Now I'm in. No, I'm in rework hamster wheel.
And I'm curious,
Okay,
are you referring to something like affirmative action, or and what's just happened with that?
right. So Steph, I'm trying again to
That's
get
my
you. I
guess.
saw your request and I hit accept, but it for some reason it didn't have you come up. So let me hit it again. That's so freaking weird. Okay, I'm accepting your request. Accepting your request. Steph is awesome. You have to. There you are. Yay! Okay, maybe it'll finally work. All right, I can hear you now, Steph. You want to be on camera too, or no?
No, I'm
Okay,
not in the right place.
I get it. So yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your question.
So, as most of you guys know, that there is a lot of Republicans who are trying to push anti-woke, which is essentially making companies where they don't have to have an inclusion in workplaces.
Right.
So that's essentially what my question was: is because you work with so many companies, do you see companies focusing more on inclusion, or are they actually following this like anti-woke theory of not having workplace inclusion, not talking about equality um, in the workplace,
Okay, I get
if
it
that
now.
makes
I kind of
sense.
no, it makes complete sense. Thank you for asking that question. First of all, I haven't seen a lot of things change yet.
Mm,
But what I would first say is many of them weren't that inclusive in the first place. Many of
Okay.
them had DEI
Good point.
agendas that were just there in name only. Many
Yeah.
folks that got funding for DEI initiative, they never got off the ground. They never did anything. When you look at a
Okay.
lot of heads of DEI in many organizations and companies, most of them are not Black or people of color in the first place. So it's like, what are we really talking about? They haven't done a ton.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Okay.
think so that's what I would say. First of all, there hasn't been, I think there are a lot of people who do the work and who talk about it, but the actual work that companies and organizations are doing in this area of inclusivity has not been that much to start with. So I think that's the first thing. But in terms of this other piece, I think there are some organizations that are going to still try, because look, I mean, there's some people who get it. They know that there are some industries, they're diverse. People are going to apply. They're going to hire them.
Mm-hmm.
There are other diverse folks that work in some of these places. They're going to hire people that look like them. So you
Mm-hmm.
can't put that back in the bottle. I think that's going to happen. And then there are some companies that are going to say, okay, great. We don't have to pretend
Mm-hmm.
that we cared about this anyway. We no longer have to
Mm-hmm.
pretend.
We don't
And
have to pretend that we like Black people. Thank you.
Right.
yes, exactly. And it's gonna be a shock. They no longer have to, talk about Black Lives Matter when they have no idea what
Yeah.
that was. You know what I mean? They
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to do any of that. They don't have to pay lip service anymore. But there are going to be some companies and organizations that fundamentally see the value in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel
So
like it's
that's what
gonna
I.
be like you're gonna have that one manager who's like a white guy and he's like, thank God I don't have to say hello to Tyrone anymore. Like
Right.
Mhm,
I don't have to
absolutely.
pretend. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I don't have to
Because we know,
pretend.
yeah, we know anti-woke really means anti-black. Nobody's stupid.
Yeah.
We know
Absolutely.
what that means.
Absolutely.
Um, Although and what's going to be interesting, and you touched on a little bit, Trina, is I had another woman on. Her name is Nikki Lanier. She has a consulting firm, and she uh, is all about kind of anti-racist, and she runs Rare Now, which is a whole program actually for white women about allyship. She's a Black woman.
Mhm.
But one of the things she talked about, she used to work at the Fed and she's worked at a couple other places. And she said, what people don't recognize, and she's a racial equity justice person. And she said, all these folks now that may try to come out and not have to do anything with it. If you look at 2030 and you're not figuring out how to hire people that don't look like cisgender white men, you won't have anybody to work at your company.
It's true.
Because that's who's the folks that don't look like cisgender white men are the ones that are going to be available to work. So
Mhm.
if you think about it from a purely economic standpoint, you need to get over yourself, because that's what the workforce is going to look like. And so, and what is so interesting to me, and for those of us who are even remotely aware now, what's happening in Florida and trying to rewrite history. Although I think folks now are finally like, this is really insane because we're not doing that. When you see houses now not being built and fruit not being picked and people actually moving out of the state, and all of a sudden these people who voted for, like, please tell your people to stay. What? Right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
my response is, but wait a minute. See, they were taking your job, so now your job is open. So go get your job. Because see, now
Right.
the people who are taking your job are gone. So I think, when I look at people like you, Trina, and I look at people like Nikki and the work that you're doing, and now this whole, throwing out, affirmative action. Although I did see, there were several Ivy Leagues. I think MIT was one of them, maybe Cornell, that they're also getting rid of legacy admissions. Because I'm like,
Yes, I saw
the
that.
way the ruling was written, those should go away too.
Mhm.
So let's just do it all. If we're getting rid of it, let's do it
Mhm.
all. So when I look at these things and the work that you're doing, and kind of to Steph's point, I think there's going to be a reckoning that is going to probably be driven by this retention issue that has an economic impact that is going to force people to behave differently, not because they want to or because they believe it, but because it's hitting them in the pocket.
And that's the only way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way. And kind of what I was talking about earlier, if it doesn't hit their pockets, if it doesn't hit their reputation, for
Mm-hmm.
many of them, they're not going to do anything differently. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
take class action lawsuits. It's going to take, all these things,
Yeah.
or people are no longer buying from that company, or
Yeah.
they no longer have donor support or things like that. That's the only way some of them are going to get it. And I
Absolutely.
think we just have to
Absolutely.
know that. No, and like I said, there are those who do care and are invested and see the value in
Right.
it and are forward thinking and understand the importance of this. And
Mm-hmm.
then there are those who don't, and well, they're just going to get left. I don't know.
I agree. I have to stay in possibility and positivity because there's so much stuff going on right now that, my nerves are on edge around all this stuff. And you try
Mm-hmm.
to, not stay in so much anger and stay in forward moving. But that's what I love about Steph's show too. It's like he just calls it out. Let's just talk about it. That's what I do on my radio show. I'm like, we're going to speak about the facts and the truth today. Right?
I love it.
In this platform, this is what we're going to do today. Now, y'all can change it all up other places if you want to, but here we talk about the truth.
I love
And
it.
we don't have to worry about getting canceled.
Right.
No.
I love it.
No.
Is this your show?
No. Right. Exactly. It's my show, and we're going to talk about the truth.
We work here.
Right. We are woke with a capital W, right? That's what we do. That's what we do. Well, I thank you so much, Trina. I think this is such an incredibly important conversation to have. And thank you, Steph, for being on. And Jennifer was on earlier. She sent me a quick note and said she had to jump off. Thank you for tuning in, for asking your question. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, and I've got to remember to start pulling my YouTube up so I can actually see you guys commenting. Thank you for tuning in on YouTube as well, and get Trina's information. I've got it here. When I release the replay, you'll be able to see that. There's another link that she put in there. I'll make sure all of that stuff is in the show notes. She is on LinkedIn. How can people follow you, Trina?
LinkedIn is where I hang out the most. If you just find me at Trenia Parham on LinkedIn. That's usually where I spend my time online. Or you can find me on Instagram. I am there sometimes at Love Trina on Instagram. But yeah, LinkedIn is the best way to connect with me.
It's the best way. I love it. And so, if you're in this organization and you're really seeing a lot of issues around retention, you think it's a deeper issue than just, people are going across the street for 50 cents more an hour, right? Which does happen too. But if you're feeling that it's deeper, you've now met someone who has not only the skill, but the drive and the desire and the purpose to make an impact on that. So you've got a connection. So I encourage you to reach out to her to help your leaders and to help you figure out how to do something different. So thank you, Trina, for being here. Thank you, Steph, for tuning into the show.
Thanks
Y'all
for
be
having
sure
me,
to catch
Laurel.
Steph's show. Absolutely. Be sure and catch Steph's show here on Fireside because it's always fire. I always end up catching the replay, Steph, because my schedule is a nightmare. But I'm listening. I'm listening. So please be sure to tune in. This Fireside platform is an awesome platform for independent creators. There's a lot of stuff that's going on, some fantastic shows. I encourage you guys that are listening to come check it out and come support people who are these independent creators who are trying to push forward really great conversations and create dialogue that is meaningful, that is forward thinking, forward looking, and really focused on some solutions and a lot of fun too. So there's some great relationship podcasts too, or relationship shows out here too, if there's something that in that genre that you like. So generally, if you want it, you can find it on Fireside. So thank you guys for tuning in. I will be back, I think, in a couple of weeks. I have another guest who's going to talk about her journey in entrepreneurship. So I encourage you to come back and do that. I will post about it. You can find me on laurelrutledge.com. You can find all my shows. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and I'm on Facebook and IG. And so if you're looking for me, it's either Laurel K. Rutledge or The Rutledge Perspective on all of those formats. So tune into Alignment Vision Action in a couple of weeks where I will have Jillian Ryan as my guest. Again, thank you, Trina. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Jennifer, for tuning in, and for Lisa for tuning in. And we will catch you guys in a few weeks. Take care and